The Debt of Time by ShayaLonnie, Chapter 13, This Is My Job. May 2nd, 1998. The entire room fell silent when Harry and Sirius entered the Great Hall. The large room had been set up as a temporary medical treatment center. House tables were pushed together and colored banners they used to run the length of them were tossed aside or cut up for bandages. No longer did the banners symbolize the separation of houses, but instead the unity of the students, professors, and adults in the battle against Voldemort. The uninjured huddled together, providing support to one another, while the injured queued around the head table, waiting to be examined by Madame Pomfrey and her aides. Along the south wall, Draco was guarding the few captured Death Eaters, ensuring their bindings were tight and that they remained unconscious and wandless without any remorse in his eyes. He moved to snap each of their wands. If they made it to the trial and were found innocent, which was highly unlikely, they could always purchase new ones. Fred Weasley was brought into the Great Hall with deep bleeding gouges across his face. While his poor mother paled at his appearance, Fred appeared to be in high spirits, gladly telling George at his side that he now resembled Bill more than his own twin. Fleur took Molly's arm and followed behind the levitating stretcher as they carried Fred into a private area where Madame Pomfrey was waiting. Hermione was tending to the wounded with Luna and Ginny. The redhead sat beside a boy at the Ravenclaw table. He looked dazed as she splinted his broken arm. Next to him and squeezing his hand in pain was Dean Thomas, who Sirius remembered from their stay at Shell Cottage. He was being tended to by Luna, who carefully wrapped a large cut on his calf. Before Hermione had a chance to take a breath at the sight of Sirius standing in the entrance, Ginny rushed towards Harry, wrapping her arms tightly around him and squeezing as though he would disappear if she let him go. Sirius caught Hermione's gaze, and they shared a sad little smile at the sight. He noted her stance, nervous clenching her hands together at the sight of him. Without further hesitation, he walked to her, enveloping her in his arms and breathing out of a deep sigh of relief. "What happened?" "Snape's dead," he replied, trying not to let his emotional turmoil show. He still did not quite understand how he felt about the demise of his longtime nemesis. It was not more than a day ago that he had wanted to end the man's life personally, but watching as Voldemort cornered the bloke and very nearly fed him to his giant snake was nothing short of terrifying. Sirius could not help but think of Lily and wonder what she would have thought about her childhood friend's ultimate demise. "How?" Hermione wondered aloud. "Nagini," Sirius said. "We went in after Voldemort left. Nothing could be done. Snape said that Harry has to go view the memories he gave him. No clue what's been sitting in that git's head all these years." He scowled, sighing as Hermione frowned at him. Ignoring her reproachful stare, he tucked a loose curl behind her ear. Yeah, don't talk ill about the dead. Are you alright here?" She looked down at her hands and leaned in to his touch. "We've just been treating the wounded. Percy and Neville are outside fetching the bodies." Sirius only nodded. "I'm going up with Harry into the Pensieve." "I'll come too." Hermione made to move, but Sirius stopped her. "No, you stay here. You're useful here. Remus and Tonks both told me that you're brilliant with healing spells." He smiled profoundly, as if you'd be anything else. His smile widened when he watched Hermione blush at his praise. "We shouldn't be long. Nothing dangerous up there except the past, right?" "Keep an eye on him," Hermione cautioned Sirius. She glanced at Harry, who had already made a beeline for the headmaster's office, turning back to wait for Sirius. "He has a bad habit of trying to save everyone at risk to himself." "I will, love." Sirius kissed her forehead quickly before following after his godson. The truth was, Sirius was not certain what he and Harry were going to find in Snape's memories, and if the greasy git had included certain ones, it was dangerous for Harry to see them, let alone Hermione. Sirius was only accompanying Harry in order to preserve the past, or future, as it were. "Password?" the stone gargoyle asked as they approached. "Dumbledore," Sirius muttered, and Harry turned around to look at his godfather with wide eyes. "I know, twisted." Harry glanced hopelessly at Dumbledore's deserted frame, which hung directly behind the headmaster's chair, then turned his back on it. The stone pensieve was in a cabinet, and Harry seemed to know exactly how to access it. He heaved it onto the desk and poured the memories into the wide basin with its runic markings around the edge. One right after the other, they descended into Snape's memories, feeling overly anxious about what they were about to witness. They fell headlong into sunlight, their feet landing on the warm ground. When Sirius straightened up, he saw that he was in a nearly deserted playground, a single huge chimney dominating the distant skyline. Two girls swung back and forth, and a skinny boy watched them from behind a clump of bushes. His black hair was long, and his clothes were so mismatched that it looked deliberate. 2 short jeans, a shabby, overly large coat that might have belonged to a grown man, an odd smock-like shirt. "Snape?" Harry cocked a brow. Sirius inclined his head, staring at the familiar face from his past. It was hard to hate the man in the moment, looking at him as a child. Sirius, too, had only been a child when their rivalry began. He felt little remorse thinking back on his actions, save for a few that he certainly deserved to be guilty about. But looking at the child Snape with Sirius's adult eyes, he could not but help to feel pity for the boy. Harry moved closer to Snape. There was undisguised greed on the boy's thin face as he watched the younger of the 2 girls swinging higher and higher than her sister. "Mom?" Harry whispered, and Sirius frowned, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Lily, don't do it!" the elder of the 2 girls shrieked. But Lily let go of the swing at the very height of its arc and fell into the air, quite literally flew, launching herself skyward with a great shout of laughter that brought tears to Sirius's eyes. Instead of crumpling on the playground asphalt, Lily soared like a trapeze artist through the air, staying up far too long, landing far too lightly. They continued watching the memory play out, Sirius forcing himself not to look at Snape interacting with the young Lily. Despite the pity he felt for the boy, Sirius still remembered the man who did not deserve to know Lily. Not after what he had called her, not after joining Voldemort. Sirius could not force himself to acknowledge that this small child was the cause of so much hurt to a girl he had thought of as family. "Does it make a difference being Muggle-born?" Lily asked. Snape visibly hesitated. "No, it doesn't make any difference." "Good," Lily said, relaxing. "Fucking hypocrite," Sirius snapped, running away from the scene. "Sirius, stop," Harry scolded him. For once, Sirius listened. As the scene reformed, Sirius looked around. They were on platform 9 3/4. Snape stood slightly hunched next to a thin, sallow-faced, sour-looking woman who greatly resembled him. Snape was staring at a family of 4 a short distance away. 2 girls, slightly apart from their parents. Lily appeared to be pleading with her sister. "I'm not a freak," Lily said. "That's a horrible thing to say." "That's where you're going," Petunia said with relish. "A special school for freaks. You and that Snape boy. Weirdos, that's what you 2 are. It's good you're being separated from normal people. It's for our safety." Before Sirius could look around the platform in search of other faces from the past, the scene changed again. "This is it. We're off to Hogwarts," Snape said brightly, trying to cheer Lily up as they took their seats in an empty compartment. Sirius grinned at the sight of himself and a young James Potter entering the same compartment. "Ah, now look at these handsome faces." "You'd better be in Slytherin," Snape said. "Slytherin?" James said. "Who wants to be in Slytherin? I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?" "My whole family had been in Slytherin," the younger Sirius said. "Blimey," James said, "and I thought you seemed alright." Young Sirius grinned. The older Sirius let out a barking laugh. Maybe I'll break the tradition. Where are you heading if you got the choice? James lifted an invisible sword. Gryffindor, where dwelled the brave at heart, like my dad. Snape made a small, disparaging noise. James turned on him. Got a problem with that? No, Snape said, though his slight sneer told otherwise. If you'd rather be brawny than brainy. Where are you hoping to go, seeing as you're neither? Young Sirius interjected. James roared with laughter. Lily sat up rather flushed and looked from James to Sirius in dislike. Come on, Severus, let's find another compartment. Ooh, James and Sirius imitated her lofty voice. James tried to trip Snape as he passed. See ya, Snevolus. See? Sirius pointed out as the memory followed Snape and Lily out of the compartment. He's always been a git. Sirius's cowl vanished as he looked up, eyes wide. The image ahead of them stunned him into silence. Instinctively, he turned Harry by the shoulders. Are you sure you want to see the rest of this? We don't know what he was planning when he wanted you to see this, Harry. It was a distraction, simply as that. Harry's green eyes focused on him, while behind him the scene played out in Sirius's view. Move! Snape shouted, pushing his way past the short, bushy-haired girl who fell into a lanky, pale-looking boy. Lily, following swiftly behind him, called out his name. Sev, wait up! I'm fine, Sirius, Harry said, brushing off his grip and turning in the direction that Snape and Lily had gone. Though the memory followed Snape, Sirius could hear a familiar voice call out behind them from the open compartment door. Jamie, what did you do? Thankfully, the scene dissolved once again. Harry and Sirius were standing right behind Snape as they faced the candlelit house tables, lined with rapt faces. Evans, Lily, the little redhead, walked forward on trembling legs and sat down on the rickety stool. Professor McGonagall dropped the sorting hat onto her head, and barely a second after it had touched the dark-haired hair, the hat cried, Gryffindor! Snape let out a tiny groan. Lily took off the hat, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, then hurried towards the cheering Gryffindors. As she walked, she glanced back at Snape, and there was a sad little smile on her face. Young Sirius moved up the bench to make room for her. She took one look at him, clearly recognized him from the train, folded her arms, and firmly turned her back on him. Harry moved through the memory, drawn to his mother's small figure at the Gryffindor table, which was perfectly fine as Sirius's attention was drawn elsewhere. James stood side by side with the familiar bushy-haired girl, Snape eavesdropping behind them. Care to wager how long it takes the hat to stick me in Gryffindor? The girl laughed sweetly. Something tells me it'll be instantaneous. Sirius's heart clenched, but he fought to keep his expression impassive in case Harry looked back around. James grinned smugly. Bloody right. Professor McGonagall called James' name, and the boy moved toward the stool. The hat barely touched his head before it yelled out, Gryffindor! And James grinned. Harry made his way back to Sirius's side, while Sirius blocked his view yet again. Of course, said Snape. There's nothing wrong with Gryffindor. Snape scowled. Says another future little lion. Sirius did his best to distract Harry once more by pointing at the Gryffindor table where James had joined Sirius and Remus. Can you believe how young we were? He chuckled as the scene played on behind him. You were friends right from the start, Harry smiled, ignoring Sirius's strange behavior, likely assuming it was painful for him to relive the past like this. Just like me, Ron, and Hermione. Just like you three, yeah. He nudged Harry's shoulders, moving the boy along, sidestepping away from his past self as another Gryffindor joined the table. Sirius's eyes flickered back to her once before turning ahead again to watch as the rest of the sorting took place, Snape eventually being put into Slytherin. And the scene changed. Lily and Snape were walking across the castle courtyard, evidently arguing. Harry hurried to catch up with them to listen in. As he and Sirius reached them, Sirius realized how much taller they both were. A few years appeared to have passed since the sorting. "What about the stuff Potter and his mates get up to?" Snape demanded. His color rose again as he said it, unable, it appeared, to hold in his resentment. "What's Potter got to do with anything?" Lily questioned. "They sneak out at night. There's something weird about that Lupin. Where does he keep going?" "He's ill," Lily said. "They say he's ill." "Every month at the full moon?" Snape challenged. "I know your theory," Lily sounded cold. "Why are you so obsessed with them anyway? Why do you care what they're doing at night?" "I'm just trying to show you that they're not as wonderful as everyone seems to think they are." "They don't use dark magic, though." She dropped her voice. "And you're being really ungrateful. I heard what happened the other night. You went sneaking down the tunnel by the Whomping Willow and James Potter saved you from whatever's down there." Snape's whole face contorted and he spluttered. "Saved? Saved? You think he was playing the hero? He was saving his friend's neck. You know that Black tricked me into going down there, all because he was stupid enough to think I had a personal grudge against his little girlfriend." "Don't you?" Lily asked. Harry turned and stared at his godfather. Sirius started but stopped, and he turned to Harry, a feeling of pure shame bubbling up from inside of him. "There's not exactly much I can say for myself, except I was young, impulsive, and I thought he deserved it." Harry shook his head. "You could have killed him." "Yeah," Sirius confirmed. "Believe me, I was properly scolded by my friends for it too." "All over a girl?" Harry asked with a raised brow. "Not just any girl," Sirius whispered as the scene changed around them. The surroundings solidified again, and they stood on a hilltop, forlorn and cold in the darkness, the wind whistling through the branches of a few leafless trees. An adult Snape was panting, turning on the spot, his wand gripped tightly in his hand, waiting for something or someone. He said nothing. Instead, he merely looked up at Dumbledore. "Hide them all, then. Keep them safe, please." "And what will you give me in return, Severus?" In return?" Snape gaped at Dumbledore. After a long moment, he said, "Anything." "Sirius, do you know about this?" Harry questioned. Sirius only shook his head. No. At that point, it had been so long since they had seen Snape. They knew, of course, that he was a Death Eater. Everyone knew back then. At that point in the war, there was little to do with hiding behind masks. Voldemort was on the rise and they expected a victory. Why would they need to hide? But Sirius never knew that Snape had pleaded for protection for Lily, James, and Harry. Only then Dumbledore insisted he was a spy on their side. The hilltop faded. They stood in Dumbledore's office, and something was making a terrible sound, like a wounded animal. Snape was slumped forward in a chair, and Dumbledore was standing over him, looking grim. "Her boy survives," Dumbledore said. "Her son lives. He has her eyes. Precisely her eyes. You remember the shape and color of Lily Evans's eyes, I'm sure?" "Don't," Snape bellowed. "Gone. Dead. Is this remorse, Severus?" I wish I were dead." "And what use would that be to anyone?" Dumbledore coldly asked. "If you loved Lily Evans, if you truly loved her, then your way forward is clear." "He loved my mother?" Harry whispered. "This whole time Snape loved my mother?" He stared at the scene, watching his former professor, a man he had watched die not an hour ago, fall to his knees in grief-stricken sobs over the death of his mother. Sirius turned away, unable to watch. He knew those sobs. They were all too familiar to him. Losing the woman you love was a pain unlike any other. Very well. But never, never tell Dumbledore. This must be between us. Swear it. I cannot bear, especially Potter's son. I want your word." "My word, Severus, that I shall never reveal the best of you," Dumbledore sighed, looking down into Snape's ferocious, anguished face. "If you insist." The office dissolved but reformed instantly. Snape was pacing up and down in front of Dumbledore. Mediocre, arrogant as his father, a determined rule breaker, delighted to find himself famous, attention-seeking, and "You Potters sure do know how to leave an impression," Sirius sighed, raking his hands through his hair. This trip down the memory lane, and not his own, was becoming more and more worrisome. Why did Snape need Harry to see all of this? To rub it in his face that he loved Lily first? One last moment to take a shot at Harry and James? "You see what you expect to see, Severus," Dumbledore said without raising his eyes. "Other teachers report that the boy is modest, likable, and reasonably talented. Personally, I find him an engaging child." The scene changed once more, and they stood again in Dumbledore's office. Sirius and Harry watched carefully as Snape hovered over Dumbledore, staring at the blackened hand of the old headmaster. "You have done well, Severus. How long do you think I have?" Snape hesitated and then answered, "I cannot tell. Maybe a year. There's no halting such a spell forever. It will spread eventually. It is the sort of curse that strengthens over time." Harry openly gaped at the scene. He was already dying? Sirius put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "The Dark Lord does not expect Draco to succeed. This is merely punishment for Lucius's recent failures. Slow torture for Draco's parents while they watch him fail and pay the price. In short, the boy has had a death sentence pronounced upon him as surely as I have," Dumbledore said. "Now I should have thought the natural successor to the job, once Draco fails, is yourself." There was a short pause. "That, I think, is the Dark Lord's plan." "The boy must fulfill his mission," Dumbledore spoke, and Snape turned and scowled at him. "You would have a mere child throw away his life?" Snape narrowed his eyes. "After all he's risked so far, the marking ceremony nearly killed him." "I would have young Draco fulfill nearly his entire mission," Dumbledore clarified. "I would not have the boy's soul ripped apart on my account. You must be the one to kill me." "Malfoy was telling the truth," Harry shouted. "And my soul, Dumbledore? Mine? You alone know whether it will harm your soul to help an old man avoid pain and humiliation," Dumbledore said. "I ask this one great favor of you, Severus, because death is coming for me, as surely as the Chudley Cannons will finish bottom of this year's league. I confess I should prefer a quick, painless exit to the protracted and messy affair it will be if, for instance, Greyback is involved. I hear Voldemort has recruited him, or dear Bellatrix, who likes to play with her food before she eats it." Sirius audibly snarled at the mention of Greyback and his dead cousin. At last, Snape gave another curt nod. Dumbledore looked satisfied. "Thank you, Severus." The office disappeared, and now Snape and Dumbledore were strolling together in the deserted castle grounds by twilight. "Now, listen closely, Severus. There will come a time after my death. Do not argue, do not interrupt. There will come a time when Lord Voldemort will seem to fear for the life of his snake." "For Nagini?" Snape looked astonished. "Harry," Sirius called to attention. This was what Snape had been referring to, after all, when he had given the boy his memories. Something about the bloody snake. He listened closely, watching the two men carefully, as if looking for subtle cues that they were hiding anything else. How had he not known the reason Snape turned against the Death Eaters? He had spent months around the table at Grimmauld Place staring into Snape's face while listening to reports, all the while wondering what on earth could have brought him here to begin with. Was it so easy to think that Snape could have loved her? Really loved her? Tell him on the night Lord Voldemort tried to kill him. When Lily cast her own life between them as a shield, the killing curse rebounded upon Lord Voldemort, and a fragment of Voldemort's soul was blasted apart from the whole and latched itself onto the only living soul left in the collapsed building. Part of Lord Voldemort lives inside Harry, and it is that which gives him the power to speak with snakes and a connection with Lord Voldemort's mind that he has never understood. And while that fragment of soul unmissed by Voldemort remains attached to and protected by Harry, Lord Voldemort cannot die. So the boy must die? Snape asked quite calmly. And Voldemort himself must do it, Severus. That is essential. Bullshit, Sirius shouted. We're done with this, Harry. He growled and moved to raise his wand to bring them out of the pensieve, but Harry pulled away from him. Harry, I will not put your life at risk over the assumptions of a crazy old man and a so-called reformed Death Eater. I won't. It's not your choice, Sirius. I'm not letting anyone else die for me. No one's going to die for you. My parents did. You did. I'm still here. I'm doing my job for once, James. Just as Sirius caught his mistake, Harry caught it too. Sirius took in a deep breath to calm himself, resting a hand on Harry's shoulder. I'm supposed to look after you, Harry, he said clearly. Keep you safe. I promised your parents. I promised to keep you safe. The scene meanwhile played on. Expecto Patronum. From the tip of Snape's wand burst the silver doe. She landed on the office floor, bounded once across the office, and soared out of the window. Dumbledore watched her fly away, and as her silvery glow faded, he turned back to Snape, his eyes full of tears. Sirius could not look at it. He had known Snape's Patronus, and he had always been a little suspicious, but his belief that Death Eaters could not possibly love kept the truth far away from him. However, seeing the silver doe right in front of him, after all this time? Always, Snape said. Unable to witness any more, Harry and Sirius rose up out of the pensieve. Moments later, they were lying on the carpeted floor in exactly the same room. Snape might have just closed the door. Sirius shook his head. I don't know what to tell you, Harry. Snape loved my mother? Harry mumbled. Do you think if he'd never called her No. She would have ended up with James no matter what, Sirius said with as much emphasis and passion as a man defending his faith to an unbeliever. Lily loved James, and James worshipped Lily. Sirius held his hand in his hands. The versions of the past had not all been pleasant ones. One day, I'll take you back through my memories, and you can see how they were with each other. You can see everything. I'll tell you everything. I'm sorry, Sirius, Harry muttered softly. Sirius frowned. You've got nothing to be sorry for, Harry. Petrificus totalis. Eyes wide as the spell hit him in the chest, knocking him backwards and binding his body tightly. Sirius's gaze followed Harry's as he frowned down from above him. Thank you for everything, Harry said clearly. You're the only father I've ever known, and you've done a good job with what you've been given. Take care of Hermione for me. Take care of everyone. He brought himself to a knee beside Sirius's frozen body and placed a hand on his shoulder. This is my job, Sirius. Our job, Sirius thought angrily as Harry walked out of the door. And that's the end of chapter 13.